Android.com. In this video, we're going to look at a type of sharpening that adds contrast called wide radius unsharp masking. You don't have to know all that, but let's take a look at it in Photoshop. Now this is the focus stacked image. I think it was, 20 frames or whatever. Sharp near to far. I've cropped off the bottom a little bit just to make it fill the window. Let's take a look at how this sharpening can be applied. Let me show that. Make sure we've got one layer here, and I'm going to duplicate that layer to work on that layer separately. You don't have to do this, but it's best not to modify your original. And okay, so I'm going to be working on that layer. And the technique is really extremely simple. I'm going to blow it up extra just so you can see it easier here in the video. Let's suppose you want to add a little extra contrast to this image and do it different way than say a curve or something else, which I cover in other videos. The simplest technique, which I call Localized Contrast Enhancement, is to go Sharpen Unsharp Mask. And this is about all I use Unsharp Mask for, and I'm going to really exaggerate this, put it at 100, and you can see that it greatly accentuates the light to dark transition. So how to use this well? First of all, the radius should be quite large. I usually use 50 pixels. The threshold is 0. And my minimum is generally 6. And if we click this on or off, there's a very subtle effect here. Maybe we can see more down here. It just perks it up a little. Not very much, so it's pretty subtle. But what if we use, say, 10? And we click on. Now you can see there's a pretty significant effect. Off, on, off, on. And generally speaking, I don't tend to go over 10 with a color image, but let's just go to, for giggles, let's go to 20. And then off, on, off, on. And let's look down at our playa section here. Off, on, off, on. So if you look at this, basically what it's doing is it's enhancing contrast within an area, which makes dark things a little darker and light things a little lighter. So off, on, off, on. You can see that the small gray middle tone patches of mud get a little darker. That's off, on. The lighter clay gets a little lighter, and so on. And that really gives you an impression of, I'm going to click OK here. That gives you an impression of a snappier image. So I just sharpened it. Now undo that. It just doesn't look as punchy. On, off, on, off. Now, I don't recommend overusing this. So that's sharpened this way pretty heavily. Turn it off. Let's go back to that. My sort of working default for an image which needs a little extra contrast would be 8. Amount of 8, radius 50, and I never do anything with threshold. And you can this little preview, you can go click somewhere if you want. I don't find that particularly useful. You might as well just look at the whole image. And you might want to zoom in a little more, especially on a Retina display, to get a sense of it. But you can totally annihilate the image like this. Maybe there's a reason to do that. Notice that the Fujifilm has a horizontal banding problem. I wrote about this 5 years ago. See these horizontal white stripes? This is just an aside. This sharpening's actually brought out those stripes in the sky. That's pretty horrible. It's supposed to be a professional camera. That's complete bullshit. I mean, Phase 1 doesn't have that problem. Look at those white stripes. Okay, before, after, before, after. Oh, that's awful. Wow, I didn't know sharpening could make it that bad. That's just pretty terrible. It's hidden by detail over here more, but that sky is just, ugh. Okay. Well, anyway, that's an aside. Okay, so it's filter, sharpen, unsharp mask, and then my general recommendation would be to use something between 6, just a touch that you can just notice without with, just perks it up a little bit. 8 is kind of a good all-around standby. Maybe, hopefully the video shows this. I'll do it real fast so you can sort of see the flicker of the darkness change. So yeah, and it starts to get more obvious. I think it's a little heavy-handed for some color images. I particularly would not want to use it for people most of the time. Click it on and off real fast. Okay, so that's how that works. But there is another effect you should know about. I'm going to apply 30 here so we can show this. All right, so that's a USM 30. That's after and before, after. Now, if you look at the image as a whole, what can happen is it can actually make the color more saturated. So be aware of that and don't just look at the contrast. Examine the color too. I guess this image isn't showing that well, but it has the effect of the colors look more saturated. If you still want the contrast, one way you can deal with that is you can do what's called a fade, or actually the simpler way to do is to add a new layer. I cover layers in another video. New hue saturation layer, and just say dial in -5 on the saturation, and you can see you can subtly reduce that saturation. So in that way you can get the contrast you want, but maybe don't add saturation. In this case, you might like the extra contrast, but it can often look heavy and make the image feel a little ponderous. So I don't like that in some landscape images, and you'll probably really dislike it for something like a portrait. So watch what you're doing with this, and don't overuse it. Stick to something like no more than 8 by default, and only use more if you need it. Black and white images, however, you can go a little heavier on because they often look better with a more aggressive Unsharp Mask, just because the black and white kind of benefits from contrast most of the time. All right, so that's wide radius Unsharp Mask, and that's just one of many sharpening techniques.